Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're going to have a faction focus video on the Halflings, covering possible troops, lords, heroes and characters. So without further ado, let's begin. Just a quick heads up, we've not finished our Chaos series just yet. We're going to get that done soon. I've just been busy with a few projects which have demanded a bit more extra time. I hope that's okay with you guys, but without further ado, let's start looking at the Halflings. The Halflings are probably the most popular minor race in the Warhammer fantasy universe. While originally conceived as a bit of a joke, and most of their lore being directly inspired by the works of Tolkien, the Halflings did find themselves being fleshed out quite nicely. Unfortunately, the Halflings never received their own official army book, but they did receive an official White Dwarf supplement known as the Hungry Horde. So who are the Halflings? Halflings are a race of short humanoids, dwelling primarily in the moot in the lands of the Empire and other various scattered regions in the Old World. Halflings have lived in the Empire for as long as anyone can remember. They are somewhat vertically challenged, rosy-cheeked, no doubt due to the quantity of ale and imported wine they consume, boast hairy feet, even the womenfolk, and are generally described as having a well-fed look about them. They are seen as peaceful, well-meaning, honest, caring, sharing, simple rural folk. That is, by people who have never actually met one, never mind someone who has met one up close, behind the pointy end of a well-concealed dagger. Halflings are not especially warlike in the broad sense of the term. They are mostly game wardens, watchers, farmers and foresters. True, there is an odd exception. At least 50% of the population could be described as poachers, thieves and vagabonds. The rest are hungry, but tomorrow is another day. They are, however, fiercely defensive of their homeland, the Moot, which is situated around the lands of the Upper Ava River and was granted to them in the year 1010 of the Imperial calendar. It is a green land with gently rolling hills, formerly populated by a myriad of bouncing bunnies. That was before the Halflings took up the bow and became extremely proficient in its use. It is due to this fearsome skill with the bow that Halflings are called upon by the Empire to provide troops for its army, but when threatened, the entire moot can quickly be armed and very dangerous to know. Now, before we start looking at all the possible units, it is important to note the following. Due to the fact that the Halflings have very little possible starting positions and the fact that they are considered to be a minor race, it is very unlikely that we'll see them being created in the form of its own race pack. Instead, if we ever see the Halflings ever implemented into the Total War Warhammer series, it would most likely be in the form of a DLC pack for the Empire. In a perfect world, this would be its own new form of DLC. Rather than a Lord versus Lord, this would be a DLC that completely adds in a new playable minor race for the Empire with as much of the Halfling roster as possible, because despite the fact that it was a supplement faction, it was actually fairly large. Now, let's start looking at the possible units. First, we have the generic Halfling. This was your basic frontline unit. Not great in melee combat as can be expected, but decent enough with a bow that it balances it out. You'd be able to use this as a ranged unit and also as a basic tar pit. These could then be divided into separate units to give some army variety. For example, you would have the poachers, which would use hand weapons and bows, the gatherers with basic hand weapons, and then finally the Halfling Militia with spears, hand weapons and shields, and another variant with slings. Next we have the cooks and the crazed cooks. Cooks are the elite infantry of the Halflings. While once again not having the best stats possible because, well, Halflings, they did have better stats than the standard ones and have an interesting mechanic attached to them which a lot of Total War Warhammer players and Warhammer Fantasy tabletop players will find familiar. That of the crazed cooks. The best way to explain how cooks and crazed cooks work together would be the exact same way as how night goblins work with night goblin fanatics. Inside the unit of cooks would be a crazed cook, and when the enemy got too close they would be unleashed. The crazed cook would then travel in random directions and do damage to anything it came in contact with. So I don't see the crazed cook becoming its own unit, but once again working in the exact same way on how the fanatics work for the night goblins. Next we have the Halfling Housewives. Don't let the name fool you, the Halfling Housewives were perhaps their best melee unit. Stat-wise they weren't generally the best in terms of melee capabilities, but they had higher toughness than most, which meant that they at least would be a bit more durable. Housewives had a special rule called Woman's Wrath, which was if any male halflings within 8 inches of them died, they would be subject to Frenzy. In Total War Warhammer, however, I'd see them being implemented with Frenzy straight off the bat. In terms of infantry, they also had Halfling Thieves, which on the tabletop was used to steal magical items away from enemy units. Unfortunately, something like this is a bit difficult to implement, so it might make more sense if this unit is altogether forgotten. Next we have some animals, which are the Poultry Swarms. Yep, exactly what you can imagine. Chickens, geese, turkeys and ducks used as a swarm unit. Unfortunately, swarm units in Total War Warhammer are being used more as a spell more than anything, but it would be rather interesting to see just a bunch of angry chickens attack an enemy. I mean, could you just imagine a mass of chickens or ducks just randomly taking out Kolek? And now we'll look towards the possible mounted units. You see, the halflings used to breed a large amount of animals, many of which would grow to quite large sizes, especially when comparing them to the size of a halfling. Here they had swan riders, sheep riders, battle ram riders, goat riders, and even eagle riders. Now, in all honesty, barring the eagle riders, the others pretty much did the exact same thing. Some had better movement than others, of course, but combat-wise, well, there wasn't really much of a difference, so instead, I'd say another unit should be implemented in return, that of the Rooster Riders, which were known for the Dogs of War army book. It's a rather iconic unit, a lot of people know the Rooster Riders, and honestly, it just makes a lot more sense. These would be a fast-moving, skirmishing cavalry. What they'd lack in melee capabilities would be made up with speed. That's pretty much it. They wouldn't be absolutely amazing in game, but you could use them as war machine hunters, or at the very least just to slow down war machines whilst your actual units that do damage get to them. Now we've got 2 different possible war machines. First is the Halfling Hot Pot. Everyone pretty much knows what this is. It's essentially just a catapult that fires food at you. On the tabletop it could actually do quite a bit of damage, since surprisingly it was a strength 5 weapon in the main circle of the template. The Hot Pot was always famously known just because it was a ridiculous looking war machine, but then again it's got its charm, it's got a unique looking aesthetic, and I think that's why people want it in the Total War Warhammer series. And lastly we have the Reaper and the Shearer. Yes, technically these are 2 different models, but they both act exactly the same way. The only actual difference here is that the Reaper has better stats than the Shearer. Both of these are anti-infantry war machines that had surprisingly decent stats. Think of these as follows. The Shearer would be the equivalent to the Skaven Doomflayer, and the Reaper would be the equivalent to the Skaven Doomwheel. Honestly, it's very unlikely to me that if the Halflings ever got implemented into the Total War series, that we'd get the Reaper, the Shearer, and the Hot Pot. So in all honesty, I would prefer the Hot Pot over anything else, but that's just me. The Halflings were known to use a wide variety of monsters in their roster, such as baby dragons, giant eagles, giant swans, pegasi, and more. However, since they would most likely join up with the Empire, whose army roster is already quite full as it is, it would make no sense to add these things. Instead, I would suggest 2 regiments of renown to be added in for the Halflings. One being a treeman, maybe even a smaller sized variant of it, as the treemen were known to also inhabit the moot, and the last being the pantry guard. These were just cooks with more than a reputation for their culinary skills. Not many regiments of renown need to be implemented if this is a minor race joining up with an already established faction. Now, before we discuss any possible legendary characters, there is one gleaming question. Should there be any Lord and Hero choices for the Halflings, even if they're just joining the Empire as a minor race? From a purely thematic perspective, yes, it would make sense to have access to a Moot General and a Moot Captain, just some basic Lord and Hero choices to be able to lead full Halfling armies. Yes, this wouldn't be the most amazing army, but I know people who like to use thematic troops. It would look a bit odd if you had a full Halfling army, but then it was led by an Empire Captain and an Empire General. Sure, this Lord and Hero variant would be quite weak, especially when compared to the Empire Captain and the Empire General, but sometimes a thematic approach beats practicality. Now, in regards to possible legendary characters, honestly, if this is just going to be an expansion towards an already existing roster, it would make sense to add in at least one. There's not that many established options in the lore, but I would highly suspect Hismi Stoutheart. He is the current Elder of the Mootland, and therefore one of the electors of the Empire. This character had no official model, but then again, I think only one named character did, and that was part of a Dogs of War regiment. But it just makes sense to me to have the actual Elder of the Mootland as the playable character, if a playable character is a possibility. It is doubtful to think that the Moot would ever be turned into a starting position, especially since Total War Warhammer 3 is most likely not going to feature parts of the Empire, but you never know, for the future they might surprise us. As stated before, I honestly don't think that the Halflings would get their own playable faction or their own playable race pack. Instead, I personally think it would make sense just to have those units being implemented directly to the Empire. A small set of new units can add in a lot of new flavor to an already established group of factions, but once again, that's just my opinion. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. Also, yes, I am aware I didn't mention established characters in the supplement, such as the elf Legolas, the dwarf Giblet, and the human Aragand, but as you can already imagine, those are blatant inspirations, if you want to call it that, of Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn, and yeah, I don't think they want to take on the Tolkien family. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various different social media links such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord, where you can get in contact with the Great Book team. Also in the description section below is an affiliate link with Element Games, where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Using our special link and also the special code, which is also in the description below, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A special thank you to Ryan Bertsche and Gibraltar LUSC for subscribing to us at our Fame level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule and VSVasan for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you guys enough. The money earned from Patreon is going directly back into the channel, slowly upgrading little bits and bobs, just trying to get to a higher level of content for you guys. And a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. The support has been insane lately, and honestly, we can't be more than excited. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.